Hey traders, this is Blake Morrow. Happy Friday. You're listening to myself on Traders Summit with the one and only Dick Matthews. Dick, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. And like I've said before, I love having this Friday session with you. I've got Mr. Richard Matthews of GC Partners talking about the good old days in the markets and really kind of recounting some of the steps that you've had over your very, very illustrious career. But I hear, because we talked about it last week, you had some responses regarding some of the restaurants and pubs that you'd gone to.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I know last week my mind went blank trying to remember. There's probably too many Friday sessions in some of the pubs and restaurants that I went to, which were somewhat more disheveled than this afternoon sessions. And a lot of people got in touch with me and said, hey, you forgot this restaurant, you forgot that bar. And, there was a series of 3 bars, which were, I'm going to get this wrong again, a bar called Shorts, a bar called Latrex, and a bar called the Mithras. And it was called the Bermuda Triangle because anyone who went in there never came out alive. And that was one of the ones which came back to me more than any others. And there's a fantastic old pub called the Dr. Butler's Head, which I think is in Masons Avenue, which I might be wrong on the address. And it was a wonderful boozer and did the most amazing steak and kidney pie. And it's still going. And it was a great traders pub. So I've forgotten that one. And all the others, that were just hysterically funny restaurants, and the ones that used to cut your tie off if they didn't like your tie, they just cut it in half and they pin it up on the wall, and that's still a great tradition in the restaurant. So thank you everyone for getting in touch with me, and I hope I brought back some memories to you.
That's awesome. That's one of those things that I'm sure there were so many stories, so many different places and locations. I'm sure that it jogged a lot of people's memories. So awesome. So today we want to talk a little bit about some of the aggression that banks had towards the brokers back then in the early 80s, late 70s. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and the roles that like discount houses played and whatnot? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't want to come across, and it was a great job. It was the greatest job in the world, along with any broking in the city. Then was just great fun. But I don't want anyone to think that it was just you went to work, did a bit of did the crossword, then went out to lunch and got drunk and didn't do anything else. You worked really, really hard from the moment you got in, and you probably didn't have time to do the crossword. And what I think a lot of people have forgotten nowadays, that it was a held market. So you would make a two-way dealing price, a bid and an offer, and you had to have names to substantiate those prices. So you would go, I'd pay 15.5 for 10 million 1 month, 10 million pounds worth of 1 month's deposits. And you had to have a bank that was willing to pay that price for that amount. And it had to be a good trading name. You couldn't say Bank of Toy Town or something. It had to be Bank of America or NatWest or whatever. And you would also have to know what the bank you were talking to, who they could lend to. So you had this sort of like library in your head. So NatWest will lend to blah, 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 blah. They don't like these banks. They like those banks. And with the number of banks flying around, it was really quite a skillful thing to do. And if you got it wrong, the banks would just want you immediately to write them out a difference check, the difference between what you dealt at and what you said you could deal at, which could be tens of thousands of pounds. And if you didn't, they would physically take your line out. And I mean physically, they'd pull the wire out. Whoa. So you couldn't talk to them. And you'd hear this scream of, line out. And they literally, would send their engineer around, he'd pull the line out and have to ring up on the outside line. The phone would go dead. And it was just like, really it could be really aggressive. So you'd be very aggressive with each other because you're trusting your colleagues to not be, dare I say, spoofing the market. I know that no one would dream of doing those.
Never.
And not, it's just an old English word. And the banks, some of the dealers could be really scary. I mean, I remember a guy, Roger Salmon, and it was it must be long gone. Used to go out drinking with him. He'd have a black glove, and he'd put on this black glove, which was his drinking glove, because he'd have so many gin and tonics with so much ice, it would freeze his hand. And he
That's funny.
Unless he had his glove on. So he used to have his drinking glove. And you go on to him and you say, "Good morning, Roger. How are you?" And he say, "What's good about it? What have you got?" Oh my God, what's it? What do you mean, what's good? Well, the marshals have just landed in the garden. The wife's run off with the butcher, blah, blah, blah. It's just this stream of abuse with every swear word imaginable going on. And all of a sudden you go, "What's 3 months?" And you go, "Oh my God." And he sort of lulled you into a state of relaxation, and he's trying to catch you out. And it was some really, I don't know, I guess, fun times, but yeah, they're pretty upsetting. Some of the guys, pretty aggressive. There's a guy at Standard Chartered called Barry Wall, and I remember picking up the line. He had this funny little, and I'm sure he's long gone as well. He had this funny little squeaky voice, "Hello, hello." Oh my God. And I picked up the line as a junior, and I said, "Oh God." He said, "No, Jesus." And he was just like, couldn't resist having a go at you, and there's nothing you could do. So you would try and get to know them. So you go out to lunch with them, wine them and dine them. So you build up a relationship. Sure. And over the years, the really unpleasant ones didn't survive, but there were some very, very funny ones. And one of the funniest one was a guy called Mike Potter, who I know is still alive. And I ended up employing his daughter and his son at one point, who were two very, very good brokers and really, really nice. And he's a very funny guy. And he was a discount house. Now, I guess a lot of people don't know what a discount house is anymore.
Probably not.
And the discount houses acted as a buffer between the money markets and the Bank of England. And they would wear a top hat, and they'd walk around the city with their top hats on and buy bills, and they'd oil the wheels in the market. But the really important thing that they did was that if you had a problem, that you could go and talk to them. It's a bit like an agony aunt, and I'm sure if he's the least like an agony aunt of anyone I've ever met, Mike Potter. A lovely man, but not an agony aunt. And you go to him and say, "Hey, I'm having a problem with this bank or this other bank," and they would say, "Okay." And on the other side of it, they would then go and have a word with the Bank of England. The Bank of England would have a word and say, "Come on, guys, stop it. Just stop all this nonsense." And on the other side of it, that if a bank was having a problem with a broker, he would have a word with the discount house, and it would come back the other way. And that was what self-regulation was. And it worked because you trusted these guys to be straight and honest and keep order in the market. And, we had a lot of problems when the Japanese banks first came in the market. And you would quote them a price, and they didn't know what the word no was. They would just say yes because they didn't want to lose face. And you'd end up with these positions. And the bank said yes. And at the end of the day, his boss is saying no. And he's saying, "I don't want these deals." And it was an absolute nightmare because the Japanese bankers didn't want to lose face. And this was one time where the discount houses and the Bank of England worked to make sure everything worked together and the markets worked, which is why I guess in a way London became preeminent in the markets.
So what happened then, or what time frame was it when you went off of self-regulation to being regulated? What time was that?
The first time I can really remember being regulated was when I was in the futures market, and we had a market supervision department, MSD, which oversaw what was going in the markets, whether fights occurred or you swore or whatever. And there was like a self-discipline in the marketplace. But then eventually I'm trying to remember what it was called. I think it was the FSA, Financial Services Authority at the time, or came into being. And that must have been the mid-80s when you first started feeling their input into the markets. And by the time I left the markets in the mid-90s, they were all powerful and everything was watched by them. In the early days, we were just taped, and that was for our own protection in a way. But in the end of the markets, I remember going to disciplinary inquiries, and I'd have the FSA there, I'd have MSD there, I'd have my own company in there, and you'd end up all having lawyers, and it just got absolutely ludicrous. But there's one story about that which is for another day, and I can tell you how it dates it, because a certain one of my colleagues was asked about this other trader. Is he honest? And the guy turned around and said, "No, he's more bent than Boy George." Right? And whether I can say that, I don't know whether I can say that.
Well, you just did, and I'm not cutting it out.
But that dates that sort of era, which is like the mid-90s, when everything started getting really heavy, and we were videoed. Everything was videoed, but way back in the day, it was just self-regulation, and it worked so much better because you knew what the rules were.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was probably on handshakes, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And if you can't have a market like that, you know, and if you can't have a market, the futures market was on a wink or a thumbs up or whatever, and that's the way that the financial markets work.
So, well, what days past, you know, that brings us to, you know, what we're going to talk about next week. I'm really excited to talk about your transition from being for when you went into the futures market as a broker, and that must have been a life-changing experience for you.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't a day oneer, as they call them on life, when life opened. I arrived several months later, and it was just, I just loved it. And the day I walked onto that trading floor, I just absolutely loved it. And it was made up pretty much in the early days by most of the renegades from every other market. So you'd have the real renegades from the commodity markets, the renegades from the interbank futures, the interbank market, renegades from the foreign exchange market. So like this bunch of people who had the brains and had the intelligence, but didn't have the discipline to make it in other markets. And there was just these larger than life characters. I mean, just hysterically funny characters. And the really amazing thing was the brains and the speed of the brains that they had. And compared to money broking, I'm going to be very unpopular with some of my old money broking friends. It was a much more difficult job. You're standing there, you're doing calculations in your head, you're adding numbers up, you're watching hand signals, you're watching the market, and you've got no office and you've got no one else to help you, and you're standing there doing this on your own. Much harder job than the money broking, but much more fun.
Well, I can't wait, and I know all of our viewers can't wait to hear your stories about your transition into being a futures broker and being on the floor. So Dick, I want to say it's been great chatting with you again this week. I'm super excited about next week as well, and I want to thank you for your time. And I know everybody at home that's listening in right now, whether they're at home or they're in their offices, they thank you as well.
And have a good weekend. Speak to you next week.
You do the same.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.